Okay, good evening. So this week's Parsha is Parsha's Kedoshim. As I mentioned last week, in Eretz Yisrael they're a week ahead, but Parsha's Kedoshim here in Chutz La'aretz. The first offering tonight is the opening pasuk of this week's Parsha, Parsha's Kedoshim. Daber el kol adas b'nei Yisrael v'amartu alehem kedoshim tiyu ki kodesh ani Hashem Elokeichem. The famous opening pasuk of this week's Parsha. Now, one point to question is, why does the pasuk say Daber el kol adas b'nei Yisrael? The normal phraseology is Daber el b'nei Yisrael, and that's it. Why does it say Dafka Daber el kol adas b'nei Yisrael? What is that about? And furthermore, Rashi says Daber el kol adas b'nei Yisrael Melamed, because it was said in front of the whole congregation of Klal Yisrael, Melamed shenemer Parsha zu b'Hakel. This is teaching us that this Parsha was said at Hakel once every 7 years. And Miz Hashem Mashiach should come, and it should be this coming Sukkot, the Sukkot after Shemitah year. And it's said once every 7 years, because the Parsha's Kedoshim is so important. Roiv Gufei Torah, the body, the main bulk of Torah, is included in it. Now the question is, what does that mean exactly? What is Roiv Gufei Torah? What is Roiv Gufei Torah? The majority of the body of Torah is included in Parsha's Kedoshim, and that's why it's got to be said at Hakel Daber el Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael. So I came across a very beautiful Alshich. The Alshich, I don't know if you're familiar with his sort of style. The Alshich was a famous 16th century Mefarish. He was a great darshan of the time of the heyday of Sfas. Living at the time of the author of the Shulchan Aruch and the Kabbalists in Sfas, and the Alshich would give drashas and would be the famous darshan. His style is to ask lots of questions. This is a dangerous sefer to learn after the Suda on Friday night, because you're learning through and there's 15, 20 questions, and then he goes through and he answers all the questions. And sometimes Friday night after the meal, you're sitting there learning and you can sort of drop off halfway through the questions. You're left with the questions and not the answers. But be that as it may, let me share with you the first two questions he asks in this piece. There are many, many more questions he asks, but I just want to highlight two of them. Roy Lossom Lev. If you look at the third box on the sheet, if you're listening online, please email me j.golker@gmail.com and I'll send you the handout. Says the Alshich, Roy Lossom Lev. One should pay attention. Aleph. Lama hutzrucha hakahalas kol adas Yisrael b'Parsha zu. Why, when it comes to Parsha's Kedoshim, are we inviting the whole of the Jewish people? Question number one. What's special about Parsha's Kedoshim that it's kol adas b'nei Yisrael? Question number two. The pasuk says, "Daber el kol adas b'nei Yisrael v'amartu aleihem." So says the Alshich, "Oimrei v'amartu aleihem shumu yusa." Those words are redundant. It could have just said, Daber el kol adas b'nei Yisrael kedoshim tiyu. Why are you repeating or adding the words v'amartu aleihem? Those seem to be redundant. Okay, those are the two opening questions of the Alshich. Let's go through what he says. V'nova el bir haksuvim. Let me explain to you the explanation of these psukim. V'hu, and it is, Ki liyoyse yizbarach bo lahazir es ha'odom al chasidus v'kedusha liknois ruach v'neshama lehidomes lebor yizbarach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the beginning of this week's Parsha is teaching us the importance of how to become a chosid, pious. Again, remember, the Alshich is writing 200 years or so before the beginning, the founding of the Hasidic movement. He's talking about piety, the kedusha, and holiness, to acquire, progression in spirituality, to become close and to become similar, as it were, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to become godly. The Torah is teaching us how. Re'eh, v'hinei yesh b'nei Adam. There are those people, gam b'nei ish toim miderech haseichel, who foolishly think, ba'omram, ki lo kol adam roi lekach. Not everyone is cut out to be holy, spiritual. You've got one or two in a generation who can become exceptional, holy people. And therefore they become lax in progressing in the spiritual ladder and making progress in ruchnias. But that's not the case, says the Alshich. Ki im she'ein ish b'Yisrael. There is not a man in the Jewish people shelo yasig im yirtze lalos b'Torah, who cannot elevates himself or herself in Torah, for Kishroin, and in effort, Hamaisa, for his spoid b'chasidus ad Kedoshim, until he can be called a Kodesh. In other words, it's accessible for everyone. Therefore, Al-Kain, next paragraph, Al-Kain lahorazeh, to teach us this point, Siva Yisbarach, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's commanded us, v'omar, Daber el kol adas b'nei Yisrael, Kedoshim tiyu. Speak to the entire assembly of the Jewish people, and tell them Kedoshim tiyu, that they can all be holy. Ki hikil es kulam, he gathered them all together, lahorosom, to teach. Ki kol ha'eda muchanim lekach, every single person has the ability, the potential to become great. V'lo tomashet tedaber kol ha'eda, and don't speak to all the people. Don't tell me that we should gather all the people and we're only addressing a few individuals within the people. That this amira of Kedoshim Tiyu, this statement, this injunction of Kedoshim Tiyu, Shetom Aleim Kedoshim Tiyu, is addressed to everyone. And that's why it says V'omar Aleim Kedoshim Tiyu. In other words, to answer our two questions, why does it say Daber kol adas b'nei Yisrael? To teach us that everyone is invited and has the opportunity to be Kedoshim, to be holy, and to try and elevate themselves and become special. And why does it say V'omar aleihim? That don't mistakenly think that this opportunity is given to everybody, but actually they're only there for a few of you who are going to achieve it. No, Daber kol adas b'nei Yisrael, V'omar aleihim, and teach every single one of them, the whole of the Jewish people, the kol adas b'nei Yisrael, Kedoshim tiyu. Amazing, very interesting alshich. That came across a story involving the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon, one of the greatest people that Jewish people have produced in the last many hundreds of years. The Vilna Gaon often would go to Golus. Of course, he would sit in his room and the Talmidim were made about him that he would learn 22 out of 24 hours. But there were periods in his life where he went to Golus in exile, self-imposed exile, as some sort of kapara, some sort of tikkun for whatever it may be. And one time he went to a place, of course he was incognito, he was anonymous, no one knew who he was, and he was invited by a Jew who was blind. And he said, come for Shabbos, he recognized a stranger in town. And he said, come to me, you'll see there's delicious food, and there's lots of other guests, and you'll feel very at home. And he said, on Shabbos, I'm like a king. So the Vilna Gaon took him up on his offer, and he went to this man's house, and they were dirt poor. And him and his wife, they had literally had nothing. And she would go to the bakeries and collect the bits of flour, and she would bake and she would make, and somehow they cobbled together a Shabbos meal, but they invited lots of people. And the Vilna Gaon said that this man looked and felt like a king. A blind man who was struggling with Yisurim and with poverty and with lack of vision, and yet he felt like a king on Shabbos. And the Vilna Gaon said, I'm not jealous of a lot of people, but this Jew I'm jealous of. How he felt and he treated, and the Mechabed Shabbos, he was Machlis Orchim, and he was Somech Bechelko, and that's the point, that even a simple, seemingly blind Jew is also Kedoshim Tiyu. He also is part of Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael, and that opportunity of Kedoshim Tiyu, that instruction, that invitation to be Kedoshim Tiyu, is not to just a few unique people in the generation, but it's Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael, V'omar Aleim, and tell them, all of them, they're all invited to take this invitation to become Kedoshim Tiyu. Okay, let's press on. The Pasuk says in Vayikra Yud Tes, Pasuk Tes Vav, B'tzedek Tishbeit Amitecha. The famous pasuk which Rashi says on this pasuk, either kamashmo, judge someone favorably. Dovach, says Rashi, hevedon es chavercha lekaf schus. One has to judge your friend lekaf schus. It's given the benefit of the doubt. Okay, that's well known, that famous statement, havedan es kol adam lekaf schus, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, based on this pasuk, Sedek tishbet es amitecha. So let's give an example of that. You're walking down Golders Green Road on Friday night, and you see a Jewish person, come out of McDonald's on a Friday night, Chil Shabbos, eating treif, bidon lekaf schus. Maybe he went into McDonald's because he needed the bathroom. Maybe there was an emergency, dan lekaf schus. Fine, that's what we're all very familiar with. I've got a simple question. There is also a mitzvah in the Torah, and astonishingly it appears 2 psukim later, also in this week's Sedra, the mitzvah of teichacha. The pasuk says, Hecheach Techiach es ametecha. You should surely rebuke your friend. So I'm confused. Which one are you meant to do? You see the guy coming out of McDonald's. Are you meant to be dan lekafschus? Or are you meant to be mochiach him? Are you meant to tell him off and say, what are you doing? How can you come out of McDonald's? You know, of course, in the right way. It's a very hard mitzvah to do properly. It's got to be done with love, and it's got to be done in a constructive way. But there is a mitzvah teichacha. So which one is it? Is it teichacha, hechiach, teichech es ametecha? Or is it hevidan es chavercha lekafschus? So it's an interesting question which I've often thought about. I once heard an answer, but let me preface the answer with a famous story. There's a famous story of the Berditchever, the Kedushas Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, one of the greats of the Hasidic world, of the early Hasidic founders. And there are many stories. He was the great defender of the Jewish people. Many stories about him where he would defend and plead on behalf of the Jewish people, and in Hasidic folklore style, he would always raise his hands and his eyes to the heavens and would say, Mi ka'amcha Yisrael. So many stories, and one of my favorites is where one time the Kedushas Levi comes out of shul and he sees the local wagon driver, the Baal HaGola. There's always a Baal HaGola in every good Hasidic story. And the Baal HaGola has left shul a little bit early, and while still wearing his talis and tefillin, he's oiling the wheels of his wagon, getting it ready for today's journey, to make it travel smoothly. He puts his hand in the wagon wheels and he's oiling wearing talis and tefillin, and he's still finishing off davening. And the folklore goes, the Hasidic story goes, that the Kedushas Levi, Levi Yitzchak, raises his eyes to the heaven and he says, Rebbeinu Shalom, Mi ka'amcha Yisrael, that even when they oil the wheels of their wagon, they put on talis and tefillin and they say Oleinu. That's how the story goes. Beautiful. The difficulty is, again, surely there is a mitzvah of hechiach techiach es ametecha. Does the Levi Yitzchak not have a responsibility to go over to this wagon driver and say nicely, Rabbi, my dear friend, surely you should take off your talis and tefillin first. This is not the way to treat talis and tefillin. Finish off davening, put away your talis and tefillin, and then you come out and you get you ready for the day and you oil the wheels of your wagon. Not whilst you're still wearing talis and tefillin and still davening. Hasn't he got a mitzvah of hechiach techiach? So, the answer I heard to this question is this. Of course he has a mitzvah of hechiach techiach, but there is a difference between bein odom lechaveiro and bein odom lemakom. Hechiach techiach es ametecha is bein odom lechaveiro, between man and his fellow man. He has a mitzvah to go and rebuke him and to put him on the straight and narrow, to help him better his ways. But klape shamayim bein odom lemakom, he should be done lekafschus. So it sort of changes the story a little bit. Of course, the Kedushas Levi must have gone over to this man and said to him, Rabbi, it's very good that you're doing, preparing for the journey, but this is not the way to do it. He must have given him rebuke in a nice way. But afterwards, when he's sort of contemplating it through or speaking to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's always melabed zuchus and says, wow, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even whilst they're oiling the wagon wheels, they put on talis and tefillin and say Oleinu. There's a difference between bein odom lechaveiro and bein odom lemokum. And that, by the way, is perhaps why the Kohen Gadol wore white in the Kodesh Kedoshim, but when he came out, he wore the Big Day Zahav. It was always Big Day Lavan in the Kodesh Kedoshim, we mentioned it last week, and Big Day Zahav when he came out. What's the symbolism? What's the significance? In the Kodesh Kedoshim, he wouldn't wear the Big Day Zahav. Why? Because the Big Day Zahav reminded HaKadosh Baruch Hu of the Egel HaZahav. And he tried, as it were, to whiten over Klal Yisrael's role in the Egel HaZahav, and he wore white in the Kodesh Kedoshim, which is between him and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when he came out, he changed to the Big Day Zahav, because on the outside his role was to mind the Bnei Yisrael about the Egel and to rebuke them. So vis-a-vis the Jewish people, bein odom lechaveiro, then hechiach techiach es ametecha. But vis-a-vis him and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, bein odom lemokum, then it's done lekafschus. Then you have to try and vindicate Klal Yisrael. Okay. I think we're going to have to leave out number 3. Let's jump straight to number 4. Let's jump to number 4. Mitzvah Hashem will have opportunities in future years. Mitzvah Hashem. Let's jump to number 4. Another interesting point in the Parsha is midva sheker tirchok. The pasuk says, "V'lo seshakru ish ba'amitai." Do not lie, do not tell fibs to your fellow man. Again, a pasuk in Perek Yud Tes, pasuk Yud Aleph. The Mesilas Yesharim, and I've seen it also in the Pele Yoetz, say a very interesting point. The Mishnah says, "Midva sheker," it's a pasuk, "Midva sheker tirchok." Lo seshakru, not to lie. Says the Mesilas Yesharim, Perek Yud Aleph. It's in paragraph 4, the second box. V'tire, and you shall see. Shalei omar misheker tishmar. It doesn't say just guard yourself from sheker. Ela midvar sheker tirchok, i.e., keep 1,000,000 miles away. Distance yourself from any falsehood. Leheir oisonu, to alert us. Al haherchek hagodel, on the distance, the great distance that is needed. V'habricha, and running away, harbe shetzorech livreach mizeh, you've got to run away from this. In other words, with other mitzvahs, it doesn't just say keep away from Lashon Hara, keep away from treif. But when it just says don't eat treif, don't speak Lashon Hara. But when it comes to emes, when it comes to sheker, we're told midva sheker tircha, keep 1,000,000 miles away, don't touch it. I saw this in the writings of Rabbi Yaakov Bender. He says a great story. He says that the Novominsker Rebbe Zatzal passed away recently. His daughter was Rebbe Treger, who lived in Yerushalayim, and the Novominsker Rebbe would, I think, make a yearly visit and spend time with his daughter and family. And whenever it was time for him to return to America, she would always make him sandwiches for the journey home. And one year she said to her, I've been thinking, when you make the sandwiches, please don't put any vegetables in them. No tomatoes and cucumbers or onions or whatever it may be, just other spreads, but no fruit and vegetables in the sandwiches. Why not? So he said, look, sometimes you make so much that there's a bit left over, so I take it home and I'll eat it the next day. I shouldn't be over Baltashkis, and I can eat the sandwiches the next day. But I'm worried when I have to go through customs, maybe the customs official is going to ask me, do you have any agricultural products that you wish to declare? Did you bring any fruit or vegetables from your overseas trip? What am I going to say? No. If I've got some fruit or some cut up cucumbers and tomatoes in my sandwiches, then I can't lie. So I don't want to get there. I don't want to lie. And I don't want to cause a problem. So just do me a favor. Just make my sandwiches without the tomatoes and cucumbers. That is midva sheker tirchok. Just keep 1,000,000 miles away from it. Reb Chaim David Swibel, I think that the deputy head of the Agudas Yisrael in America, and said something very interesting. He said in the early years the Novominsker Rebbe would talk about emes a lot. And he would say that emes is a means of creating Kiddush Hashem and the importance of being fair to others. But in later years, he changed his emphasis when he spoke about emes. And he mentioned the Magid Mishnah. The Magid Mishnah says, in Hilchos Lulav Perek Ches Halacha Tesvav, Ve'ika hadova shu ein roi la'odom lasus hamitzvah mitzat shein chayva. Says the Magid Mishnah at the very end of Hilchos Lulav, in Perek Ches Halacha Tesvav, beautiful thing. Don't do mitzvahs out of obligation because there's this yoke on you, but rather v'hu muchrach when honest and is forced to do it. A person should do them and he should be happy to do them. Do the tov that it's because it's good. Do this because inherently it's the right thing to do. And choose the truth because it's the truth. In other words, the Novominsker Rebbe would suddenly would sort of change his tack a little bit. Emes needs to be pursued not just as a means of creating a Kiddush Hashem or not being or sort of being fair to others, but being truthful because emes mitzacho emes, because that's the truthful way. That's the only way. The Gemara Shabbos says, "Chos mishla Kodesh Baruch Hu emes." We should just live lives of pure honesty, not because I'm focusing on Kiddush Hashem or whatever it may be, or it's just a nice way to behave to other people. But emes mipnei shu emes. This is the thing that should sort of pull us. So there we have 3 ideas on Parshas Kedoshim. The first idea of the Alshich to explain 2 difficulties in the Parsha. The opening Pesukim, Daber al kol adas b'nei Yisrael. Why the whole of adas b'nei Yisrael? V'omar to aleim Kedoshim tiyu seems redundant. Just say Daber al kol adas b'nei Yisrael Kedoshim tiyu. Says the Alshich, the beautiful idea that this Parsha is teaching us that all of Klal Yisrael can be Kedoshim. Dabe el kol adas bnei Israel. Like Rashi says, this is said to the entire Jewish people, b'shas hakel, when all the people are gathered together once every 7 years. And invite them and tell them that every single member of the Jewish people has the opportunity to be Kedoshim. It's not just for the elite, it's not just for one or two in a generation. And that's why it repeats, v'amartu aleihem. Gather all the Jewish people there, it's for everyone. And don't think it's just for a few of you within the Adas B'nai Israel. V'amartu aleihem, and tell each and every one of them, Kedoshim to you. That's the idea of the Al-Shich. Then this interesting clash, seemingly, between on one hand Techiach Esametecha and Havidanis Kol Adam L'Kaf Zchus. There may be other answers. How do you reconcile the two? But one answer I once heard is that the difference is Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, Ben Adam L'Mokum. Ben Adam L'Chaveiro, then you've got an obligation Techiach Esametecha. Ben Adam L'Mokum, then it's done L'Kaf Zchus. And that's perhaps why the Kohen Gadol will whiten the Kodesh Kedoshim, to whiten over Klal Yisrael's in the Egel, but then change to the big days of when he came out to remind the Bnei Yisrael, to give them rebuke, to rebuke them and give them Techacha about the Egel. And then lastly, Midva Shekatirchok, based on the pasuk in this week's, based on Lo Sashakru Ishba Amitoi, not to lie to your fellow man, that as Mr. Sasharim and the Pelayotes and others say, that it says a slightly different lashon with this Aveira more than others. Midva Shekatirchok, keep a distance, keep miles away from it. And to do the emes, like I mentioned, Vayivcha Ba'emes Mitzad Shu Emes. Do the honest thing, because it's the honest thing, that is the only way to live. Not for any other ulterior motives, just in place Shu Emes. And like the Gemara in Shabbos says, Chos Mishla Kodesh Baruch Hu Emes. Okay, thank you very much for listening.